My connection with fishing was probably through my oldest brother. He was a very intelligent person in a way, in some ways too intelligent or creative for the public school system I think that we were involved in to a degree. They didn't know how to handle him and his friends. It was also a very rebellious period of time, and there were a lot of drugs and rock and roll and whatnot. So I think he was one of those, like, there are books now on like how to teach boys, and they, instead of understanding the need for them to be physical, it was you sit in your chair and then you'd be punished or whatever. But I do know he basically had the highest SAT scores in our family. We all went to college and did quite well, and so in some ways he was the most intelligent. But he seemed to always have a battle with authority, including my father to a degree, who was a school teacher. But he was he was a gifted fisherman. He really, that was his love. But he was troubled, and I think stemming from just, if we diagnose probably the roots of addiction, depression. I'm not sure. Ups and downs, moody. So he was working construction, but also getting out on fishing out of Gloucester and around Boston. He was from away, but he had such a passion for it that he made his way into that kind of insular community, and then he became one of the a mate on a dragger. And he fished out of there, New Bedford, Fairhaven, Plymouth, like everybody does now. It was difficult to land those jobs, and you really had to prove yourself. Well, they developed this fearlessness, and he said, but unfortunately, we also developed this sort of addiction for taking risks, or this tendency. And I think fishermen, there's a fearlessness, or at least a masking of it, that lends itself. Well, if you take a risk with heroin, or why? Well, how much is that going to do? I hear what it does to other people. It's not going to do it to me. I'm a goddamn fisherman. Also, how insular the community is. Once you have a problem, and then you hide it, and it gets worse. And then if you do treat it, you come out of rehab and you're right back into the same situation. It's a very small world. It's almost impossible to escape, I think. So I think that's maybe where it's become so entrenched. It all kind of came to a head when I was a senior in college, and I was actually living with him in Gloucester, working on a construction crew, a paint crew that he was, by name anyway, the foreman of. And it was a loaded summer because everything he had kept hidden, I was unaware of, but there was some odd behavior that I was kind of noticing. At some point, I did kind of notice there was a vacancy, even to just his eyes or presence, and you still didn't put two and two together too much. And there was a little bit of theft here and there, and I couldn't figure it out, and you don't want to really. But I got back to school, and I had a paycheck coming for me, about $900 worth that I'd worked and worked about 8 overtime hours, and well, it never came to me. And he foreman takes the paychecks, and apparently had signed it over to himself. Called him up and talked to him because I was heartbroken, and I didn't care about the money. I needed it. I needed to buy my books. And that was all cool until a point. But then after many, getting into rehab, he walked out of rehab, and things turned for me. I didn't have the sympathy anymore at that point. And then I basically, we became alienated for a long time. And in my mind, he was just a thief, That's what family members and community members live with afterward, is the hell you've been put through, and then the hell you live with because you turned your back on somebody. And he passed away in an apartment in Worcester, Massachusetts, on his way back from fishing. And he's recently out of prison, so he overdosed. And the classic statistic is, I don't know how many times more prone to overdose you are when you've been clean and relapse, and that's usually coming out of prison. He was 39. Yeah.
So, at what point did you start to think about incorporating some of this material into a play?
Well, at first, I was thinking about going through it. I mean, right after when he had stolen a check from me and he was not quite into rehab and he walked out of rehab, all that stuff was going on, that I built up a real resentment. I also built up a resentment that nobody was listening to me, you know. And I wrote this play, Ultralight, because it was, well, as my friend Carolyn Chute, the great novelist from Maine, says, you get a chance to play God when you're a writer. And I wanted to be heard and create and show the world that I understood and the world and my voice and how behavior could change if people talked and listened, and I wasn't going to be silent. So I wrote it as my own kind of, not therapy, but it had to come out, and I got to do that. You know, that was the beginning of it. Opiate addiction in Moby Dick, or that metaphor illusion is the only thing capable of quantifying how big the opiate epidemic is. You know, this thing that can crush you, can wipe out a community. It can't just be kill 2 or 3 people, but it's going to be somebody that can kill a whole boatload or a whole town, or so I thought it was. It appealed to me that way, and I also just started thinking, like, what the hell is it with Ahab? Once he lost his leg to the white whale, it's almost as if he has no control over his thirst for revenge. I just kept thinking of an addict that they go back after something they've lost, and it's almost like a physical thing, like Ahab losing his leg, but it's some part of their soul that they have lost, or a high or a feeling that they can never get back to it, but they still go after it. And then the destruction that one addict causes, you know, only Ishmael survives it. So some ways I think to kind of bring it back to my brother and I, you know, and I talk about the edge and the risk-taking that's in all of us. And we celebrate people who do that because they bring back these great, exciting tales. But the ones who failed, we don't so much. But my brother went out to the edge, and I was able to follow him there. And he went over, and I got to look over and come back with the story. We performed on Vinyl Haven, and we performed it right in the Fisherman's Co-op. And I remember all the people like, oh, they're never going to let you in there. They're not. And they did. After these productions, I know either they're recovering addicts or fishermen, and they are just like on fire, you know. And you don't get that in New York theater. A fisherman came up to me after the production, and he said he just shaking his head, and he said, first he's like, this is just amazing. And my girlfriend, I believe, was what she said, you know, she saw it in the paper, said you should go. And he was like, I don't know. And then he saw the connection to my brother. He said he'd go, and then he was just kind of blown away. And like, basically, that is it. It's true. You know, you've nailed it. When a fishing captain tells you you've got it, then you're no critic's gonna put a dent in your armor, you know.
Michael Gorman's play, Chasing the New White Whale, is running at La Mama Theater in New York City through December 9th. You can find links to the play at thebriney.net. The Briney is produced by me, Matt Frasica. Music from this episode came from Blue Dot Sessions. Thanks for listening.